Well, I have good news. The gun is almost done. I just wanted to update some people. A lot of people have been following and asking about it and commenting on it, so I feel in some ways like I owe people, an update on how it's going. The good news is that it's pretty much done. I've not yet assembled the gun, not yet put it together, but I have, as of today, essentially, as the pieces came to finish curing, the wood is done, the wood is stained, the wood is finished. And this is what the buttstock's looking like. I hope that's focusing, I can't quite tell. But this is what the buttstock's looking like at this point, and pretty much what I was going for. I think maybe I wanted something a bit deeper, a bit richer, maybe a bit redder. But as I went through the somewhat laborious staining process, I realized that I think it just wasn't able to get that red that I was looking for, and that's okay. But I did the best I could. And so at the current state where it is right now, it did take three applications of Danish oil, of the finish that I use. And that was initially, the first two were of that color that I mixed. So it was Danish oil, 2-to-1 ratio of Danish oil and mineral spirits, followed by a mixture of oil paints, artist oil paints, red and brown really, to try and get a color I was looking for. And you might remember that the first coat I put on was still a bit light. When I did the second coat, it definitely darkened. And by the time the third coat hit it, it was actually looking fairly good. I was really much happier with it. And between those three coats, there was about a day of cure time in between. I let them sit for about 24 hours, 36 hours. And the final sort of stage of all of that, when you're working with a hand-rubbed oil finish, a traditional oil finish, is that you would then seal the grain, especially with walnut, which is quite wide and open pores. Not huge, but pores that you want to fill, especially in a gun that's going to be out in the woods and out in weather and that sort of thing. What you do is you flood it with oil, and then you actually sand it in with wet sandpaper, wet dry sandpaper. And what that does is it creates a kind of slurry with the sanding powder and the stain itself, and fills the grain of the wood. And that's really what I did. So for that, what I wanted to do was to try and bring a bit more depth to the color. So not that you can see, but I remixed another color that was a little bit darker. I even threw in, after a first test of it, a little bit of black, just to try and darken it up. And it definitely helped. It definitely added to the depth of color. Took away a bit of the reddiness that I had in it before, but I don't mind that so much. That's okay. What I wanted was to get it a bit darker than it was. You can see that the fore end here is still, a fair bit darker than the buttstock, but it is a lot better than it was when I started the whole project. There was a big discrepancy between the fore end and the buttstock, and the color that whoever had stained this prior to me had put on it, or at least the color that was left when the shellac or the varnish that they had put on it had really changed over time and worn down. And so I did 3 coats of that new color in 600 grit sandpaper. It's a little bit higher. Some people would do 400. I did 6, and I wanted to make sure that I really filled all that grain. Then I did something a bit weird that you wouldn't normally do for a gun, but I went over it with, I think, a 1500 or 2000 grit paper, just one quick wet sanding. And that, I think, really brought a lot of smoothness to it that I like. It's something that's probably going to wear off over time, and that's okay with me too. But the cool thing about Danish oil and about oil finishes is that really, as soon as you put the first one on, and that oil penetrates and soaks into the wood, you're ready to go. The wood is essentially stained and sealed to some degree, but as I said, with a gun stock, you really want to be, getting them as sealed as you possibly can. And so once I got that done, the final thing I did was put on a product I've worked with before, which is True Oil. I've used this on another gun stock, and True Oil is an oil that will fill some of the pores. You can use it as a standalone stain, but it tends to harden a little bit, and just I did notice that it was seeping into some areas. It was really getting sucked up into some areas that maybe, I don't know, the Danish oil hadn't penetrated. And it did leave a little too much luster on the finish. With oil finish, I kind of like that satin, not so shiny look. And so I did go over it again with steel wool, and it took a lot of, I think, the surface True Oil off, but I can feel that a lot of that remnant grain was filled with the True Oil. So that's a really, really good thing. The other thing that happened in the last week was that someone, my colleague Ned, graciously gave me some of his checkering tools. Now, for those who may not be in the know, checkering is that sort of pattern on the grip of the gun and on the forend, even though you can't see much of it, that provides just a bit of friction for your hand. And the checkering when I got the gun was just so full of gunk. You can kind of hopefully see that, you know, there's little diamond patterns from these tiny cutting blades that people, it's all done manually, or was at any rate, and you create this pattern. And you can re-dig it out or redefine it with the same tools if you go over it lightly. So knowing that I was likely to mess it up, because it is kind of an art form and not something they recommend doing as a first timer on an actual gun stock, I did practice on some pieces of wood I had lying around, and then attempted it, and results were mixed. I think they say it's good from afar, but it's far from good, and so we'll stick with that. If you look at it at quick glance, you may not notice the imperfections. When you zoom in or look close, you can see all the places where my blade went off course from the grooves. But you know, I think it does add a bit of character. It makes it mine. I'm not too worried about that or fussed about it. But it did really redefine the checkering, which is nice. And weirdly, I do think that the person who owned this gun before me was a lefty, because the checkering was worn on the left side of the gun, where a lefty's palm would rest. And the right side, which would typically be more worn for someone who's right-handed, was really untouched. So the left side is worse because I had no grooves to guide me with the tool, and so I tended to gouge it out a bit more. And you can even see on the forend too that it is a bit more worn on the right side here, where the hand would have been, you know, rubbing against it, and the fingers would be resting here. So anyway, and the other thing that alerted me to that it might have been a lefty was that early on in the sanding process there was a lot of oil in the right-hand side of the buttstock, probably from a left-handed person resting their cheek on it, and I ended up getting that out, sanded and couldn't get at it. But someone clued me in that acetone is the thing to use. That acetone really pulls oil out of the wood, not just human oil, but oil from the oil stain and everything. So at any rate, that's the completed stock and forend, and it is ready to be reassembled tonight. So I'm quite happy about that, and I'll show off the finished results shortly. Here are the parts. Oh gosh, I forgot one important part. Can't forget the butt plate. but here are the parts pretty much assembled. The only major thing that I ran into with all of this was that I didn't own the right screwdrivers, and as it turns out, gunsmithing, gun screws are very, very finicky, especially of this age, and you really do need the right size of driver. They're somewhat specific and, and not inexpensive. So I didn't have the right ones, but that's okay. I did make it work and did a bit of, well, probably things I shouldn't have to some of the wood with the screwdriver that's currently in my hand. Anyway, we'll put that on later. But here are the, yeah, 3 constituent parts. And you can see what the metal looks like against it. I should have taken more pictures and done a bit more exploration to see how these pieces fit and whether I sanded off too much of it. There's not really a big gap or anything like that, but you can see how the corner overhangs a bit, and I might have sanded it just a bit too aggressively, but it's really not a big deal. The barrel can get fitted like so. Oops. There we go. And finally, we'll pop on the fore end here, and that should slide right over. Oops. Is that not going on? I just dry fitted this and it worked fine. Ah, there we go. And there we go. Might have to take another look at that. Something there doesn't feel quite right, but not bad. Thanks for following along.